There's going to be a new Christopher Nolan movie coming out.
Yeah, that's right.
It's going to be kind of the first thing to kick off the new summer.
Yeah, theaters are reopening, and I think Nolan wants his film to be.
About 20 years since the last time he saw a movie, or last time he made a movie.
And I think they're bringing Inception back too for a 10th anniversary re-release.
I can't hear you. What?
They're bringing Inception back.
What are you saying? I can't hear you.
Inception.
What? Oh, that's right. We're in a Christopher Nolan movie.
Oh.
Dialogue's muffled. Sound is loud. Hello? Welcome to our latest episode of Deep Focus. Today we are talking about Christopher Nolan's 2010 film Inception, which is getting a 10th anniversary theatrical re-release as part of the effort to kick off new movies in the theaters.
Yeah, so we thought it'd be a good time to talk about this.
Well, Christopher Nolan's obviously, he's one of those directors that's got a very strong following. He's probably the premier director of his generation in terms of having that, whether it's a Spielberg or Hitchcock, you think of certain directors that come along and can pack in an audience just based on them. He's one of them.
Almost a cult following in some ways, especially online, it seems.
Yeah, well, there certainly is that fanboy, Nolan can do no wrong approach. I suppose that's really based on The Dark Knight more than anything else, but he's a good director, and so it is kind of, he makes event movies, and it's exciting to see that. This was an event movie, Inception, when it came out. And I know we've both seen it. I don't know that we've ever really talked about it, to be honest, at least not in any depth.
Not in depth, I don't think so. I mean, I've seen the film several times over the years, and it's one of those movies that, well, Nolan has a cult following, like I said, but I also think this movie specifically has a cult following too, where people just really prop up this movie as a great film.
Right. It's so, in many ways, I guess we get into it's a heist film, but the heist is almost in reverse. So the idea is that Nolan had this concept of a movie that was about dreams or entering into your mind, and then initially conceived it more as like a horror film. As he developed the screenplay, and then eventually it morphed into more of this heist genre of sorts. Leonardo DiCaprio plays our lead character, Dom, and he is an expert at going into people's minds with technology that's been developed by the military.
That's why the military developed dream sharing. It was a training program for soldiers to shoot and stab and strangle each other and then wake up.
So it's high concept. It's this very elaborate sort of science fiction-ish kind of story, but ultimately very simple. I know when it came out, a lot of people talk about it like it was this very confusing movie. And, oh my gosh, what's going on? And it seems to me very simple. It's like layer one, right? He's going to go in. Layer two, he's going to create this dream. Layer three, there's another dream within the dream. Right? Layer four. So it just you just got to pay attention to it. I think Nolan's films aren't as complicated as some people like to make them out to be. Probably because some of those fanboys want to feel like they're smarter than they really are. If we're being honest. But it's a good movie. It's an intricate film, and I think watching it again here, I liked it more than I had remembered liking it. I remembered liking it, but I liked it more because I think it is more emotional and satisfying on that level than Nolan's films typically are. He kind of is a cool director. His films aren't really highly invested on the human side of it. They're typically very well made, but they're also kind of cold and distant in terms of how he tells the stories. This one, I think, sometimes even almost teeters on being melodramatic when it's dealing with Dom and his story and the character played by Marion Cotillard of his deceased wife, and of course how it unravels the story there. It's I think very effective in that regard.
Yeah, I would agree with you. That's one thing that really stands out to me about this film is that emotional connection, the relationship between Dom and his wife is really the core of the movie. I mean, that's his character's motivation for attempting Inception, is to reunite with his children and reform his family that he's lost, right? I mean, he can't bring his wife back, obviously, but he can try to get back to what's left of his family, and that's really the through line. You're right to say that Nolan, his films typically are more analytical, more really consumed with the process of the story, right, or the process of storytelling itself. So Memento, of course, has a very structured approach to it. This has a very structured approach to it. But at the same time, he's not entirely married to the structure all the time. Right? He's willing to compromise it to create those emotional moments that are hopefully a bit more lasting. And I think that's where, I mean, we can kind of get into more of the specifics of the film itself and the mechanics therein, but I think that's where a lot of people maybe get confused or lost with this film is they're overthinking it. They're expecting everything to make perfect sense, and it really doesn't when you do.
Which is what dreams don't, right? I mean,
yeah, and I think people get too caught up in the idea that everything in this film has to be logical and has to follow in a perfectly logical pattern. Otherwise, it's just junk. And you could call them plot holes. You can call them, dramatic license, or call it dramatic license. But it's Nolan making, I think, a conscious decision to sacrifice some of those details to make something work.
He's a director
like
that
Scorsese does with continuity frequently.
He's a director that will, I think, try to ultimately find a character moment more valuable at times than just simply clear, coherent logic within the plot, right?
Yeah.
And maybe he's a little sloppy in how he shoots some things, but this movie is pretty solid, I think, actually. If I'm looking at Christopher Nolan's career, this might be his best directed movie, if I'm being honest. I know a lot of people would say The Dark Knight. Maybe some people might even say Dunkirk right now. But I think this one actually probably is, as far as actual coherent filmmaking structure to his chase scenes, this is very well done. So one of my favorite scenes in this film is as Leonardo DiCaprio as Dom is trying to create this new, after he's had the failed mission to try to get into Ken Watanabe's brain, or extract from Ken Watanabe's brain. They now have kind of held over their head that, listen, you gotta do this thing for him.
Yeah.
And he's getting his team together in that chase scene when he's trying to escape after he's been meeting with Tom Hardy. Is really well done, and it gets at the sense of the chaos of the world, and the way he's just trying to get down that tunnel, and the tunnel shrinks on him. It's very fascinating stuff that is
It feels
happening.
very dreamlike in that scene.
Right. Well, so the general the central premise of the film is that they have to go and convince Cillian Murphy, who's playing Fisher, whose father is dying, that he's got to break up his father's business empire, right? So that it's to the benefit of Ken Watanabe, who is going to be the beneficiary of a broken up empire of his competitor. You elaborate upon this theme, and they kind of research him, and then you start to go into his mind.
And that's where I guess one criticism I may have toward this film is how grounded in reality the film seems to be throughout, even though these are dreams.
Mm-hmm.
So
it's not David Lynch, right?
It's not, and it's tough. I mean, part of it is probably a budgetary concern to say, well, okay, we can't make everything psychedelic and crazy and weird because we have to keep the budget in check, but also that if you went too far with it, it would alienate the audience pretty easily. So Nolan makes, I think, a very conscious decision to keep it grounded in real-world environments. There's actually not many visual effects shots in this film. I think there's only like 500 visual effects shots, which is surprising. Usually a big film like this is going to have thousands.
Considering that it won the Best Visual Effects Oscar too, right?
So Nolan is I think concerned with keeping it grounded, and the scene where we start to see elements of the subconscious fighting back against them. They're these armed intruders, so to speak. It feels almost uncreative in some ways, but you can understand why he's doing that.
It doesn't bother me, to be honest. I think because it's not a David Lynch movie, right?
Yeah.
It's not trying to do something where you have this surreal element, and I don't know that a heist movie could work in that. I mean, it is a heist film,
That's
but
the
with
thing.
this fanciful wrapping, right? That's all it really ultimately is, and that part makes sense to me. I think it works pretty well because of that.
Yeah, it's like, well, if Tom Hardy can dream up a big gun, why can't they dream up other weapons and other scenarios? So you can kind of play these little logic games
Or just
all
the
day
fact
long.
that a dream could just magically shift, the setting, right? I mean, it stays because it needs to, right? They're in this city, and then it needs to be in this hotel, and then it needs to be in this bunker, right,
Yeah.
with snow.
Yeah.
But I don't mind that, because I think the film would be incomprehensible if you tried to go down the other road.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I think it has to be grounded for us to, I think, invest in the characters and invest in the situations. We need to have those tangible, real world elements to really cling on to. So the first level is the kind of rain drenched Los Angeles.
Which is one of my favorite jokes. In that the reason why is because they go into the dream, and it's Yusuf, I think is the character's name, who he didn't go to the bathroom before.
Couldn't have peed before you went under, sorry.
Bit too much free champagne before takeoff, eh, Yusuf?
Haha, bloody hot.
And that's why it's raining. It's just a funny little joke, right? It's just this little humorous thing that they do.
And we do get some surreal images at various points. So you get that train coming down the street in the middle of the city, and Nolan, that looks very real. They shot that for real. They equipped a locomotive with wheels or whatever to get it to roll down the street. So he does take the time to create some of those surreal moments to remind you that this is a dream. But it still remains quite balanced in that way.
What I think that why I like this movie is that you have in the character of Dom this other thing that's going on, right? He is
Got an
obviously
ulterior motive.
right. He's got the obvious purpose of, I'm going to try to get back to my kids. But then you also are learning that, well, there's something more to it, because there's something with him and his wife, right? Who keeps emerging as this sinister figure that's always a threat because she's in his subconscious.
Please, I need you to stay here just for now. You said we'd be together. You said we'd grow old together. Come back to you.
Right? And we don't know exactly right away what's happened with her, but we know something went wrong. And then you start to realize, well, he's kind of dabbling with creating his own dreams and living in his own dreams at the same time as trying to live in the real world. And I think the film does get some really good mileage out of that sort of thematic idea of the concept of needing to wake up, right, and face reality, which is I guess the emotional core of this film, right, is Dom trying to figure out how he's going to grapple with real life, with his world that he has. I think that's what's exciting to see developing as they keep going further and further into this, and then because the first level of the dream isn't quite working the way they needed to, they go into the second level, which is then taking place in this hotel, which then they have this sort of ruse they try to do where they convince Cillian Murphy that he is actually there to save him and protect him.
Security, huh? You work for the hotel?
No. I specialize in a very specific type of security. Subconscious security.
And that feels very Mission Impossible, that part of the movie. To me, this the whole mistaken identity, impersonating people, and Eames's character in particular is able to manifest as different people in these dreams, and that comes into play into that second level. And of course, the big climax of that level is the fight with Joseph Gordon-Levitt's character.
Yeah, the
in
zero
the hallway.
Which very effective. Right?
Yeah, so of course he's using the technique of the centrifuge set,
Right.
which was used on this Discovery in 2001. And here it's being repurposed into an action scene, which is a very creative idea. And it took, I imagine, quite a bit of practice and training to get that to work and to execute that properly. But visually it's fantastic, right? The camera's locked off. it's all in camera. There really isn't any obvious CGI enhancement going on here.
And that's getting at why I think this might be the best work that Nolan's done as a director, because that's incredibly difficult to stage, right?
Yeah.
I mean, this is not easy. It'd be a lot easier actually to try to do it in a computer and just hand it off, like the rent a director that Marvel gets, and then, but don't worry, you don't have to worry about the action scenes because it's all being done in pre-visualization, and before you even come in and start shooting a movie, they've already mapped out the climactic battle.
Yeah.
This is a film that's going to require a real singular vision of a director, and then a talented crew to implement it. But I mean, it's very well done, and I think I probably, watching it now, just came to appreciate how good the direction was, and in terms of how he develops the atmosphere. The production design's fantastic. This movie, I kind of forgotten about just how good it is.
It's beautifully designed for sure, and it's funny because they attribute some of the design elements to the specific characters in the film.
Yeah.
Because of course these are all worlds that are being designed by Ariadne or whoever might be dreaming at any given moment. They seem to have an influence on what's being manifested within the dream. Some people have made the comparison of this team to a film crew, even, where, I don't know if you ever heard that before.
Oh, yeah.
But
Yeah,
where Dom is the director
idea.
and Ariadne is the production designer, and
Yeah.
you could assign a
Everyone's
title to everybody on the team.
I need to protect my investments.
We should probably talk about Hans Zimmer's score as well at some point. That part of the film, the score really comes to a massive climax in many ways.
I got one word for that. Boom.
Yeah, so of course.
I think he fell asleep playing an organ.
It's become a source of parody, I
Right.
guess. At
Well,
this point.
partly because it was in the trailer and it was used so prominently in that.
But what's interesting is that pulsing noise that's actually used for the kicks is that French song slowed down.
I've always wondered, by the way, because they're using the Edith Piaf song as the kick, right? And of course, Marion Cotillard became so well known from having played her
That's right.
in La Vie en Rose that you just kind of go, is that purposeful? I don't know. I have no clue. I have no idea. I'd never looked into it or anything, but it just makes me wonder.
Well, the next level beyond the hotel, of course, is the hospital, the mountain hospital in the snow. And I always see this part of the film.
That's the James Bondish kind of part.
Exactly.
Right.
So
I always thought he was auditioning to take on a Bond film. And again, some people make a point about the plot. Okay, so if the gravity is coming off on the one because they're falling, and then the gravity, but then they're not on the next level. So there are little continuity errors like that, or plot holes, or however you want to describe it. But you don't care so much because you're just you're getting to the thematic point. Okay, now so Fisher's getting to this confrontation with his father, and it's developing, right? And so you kind of like, yeah, who cares? I mean, in a certain sense, you can think of this as being convenient that Nolan just decides to ignore that. And if he was trying to be much more concise in his conceit, of this premise, fair enough. I think that's a valid criticism of it. But he's not. He's really trying to develop, I think, the thematic idea of, okay, imparting an idea, and how does this impact people? And I guess that gets at maybe worth talking about just the film, right? What is this film really about? You mentioned the possibility that it could be interpreted as a metaphor for filmmaking in general. Lots of people have written about that, talked about that. I think there's reason to think that it could be getting at that. Because what is a movie, right? It's got this crew that gets together, creates all these different things, designs a world that then tries to communicate ideas to you, the audience, and get an idea into you to make you think like, oh, this is my idea, or you just kind of build it, out from there. So that's one lens by which to look at this film. Not a bad lens to look at it too.
No, it isn't. And I think the big question I think a lot of people ask with this film is the whole film a dream, right?
Come back.
so we can be young men together again. Come back with me. Come back.
What else?
Well, I'm going to take the interpretation that it is. I think it is. There's clues to it, right? So the very beginning, actually, before the real story begins, you see this man washed up on a beach, looks up, sees some kids, and then it cuts to this soldier, presumably touching that same man, right? And then he goes and meets this older man. Then eventually we'll bookend back to this scene towards the end of the film. But I've always taken it to be that, this is just a guy on a beach, maybe he's shipwrecked, whatever it might be, and then everything after that is just a dream.
Yeah, well, another idea or another theory that gets floated too is that Michael Caine's character, Dom's father, is actually the architect or the one that has designed this dream to help Dom face the death of his wife. Mm-hmm. And this is all an elaborate plot or an elaborate scheme to get him to come to terms with that. So kind of a form of dream psychotherapy.
This is a well-designed film. And I think, is it a perfect movie? By no means. But it is, I think, nonetheless, a very solid entry. And if you're looking at Christopher Nolan's filmography, you could see why this would be something of interest to him. I mean, he's obviously a director who likes big concepts. He likes big wow factors. I mean, he doesn't, I think, really want to create spectacle for his audience. And he does that here. He does it very effectively. But he also, I think, wants to find some way of creating emotional connection too.
It's a film I like a lot. I mean, I think it's become in vogue for people to bash this movie, it seems, in many ways, or nitpicking it. I mean, we did some of that here today, I guess, but I don't think it hurts the film overall. I think it's very effective. It's a creative twist on a heist film, and that's probably the best way to summarize it.
Yeah, it's a heist film. It's a heist film that's really trying to ultimately to dress itself up in science fiction clothing, in order to tell you some interesting ideas or explore some interesting ideas about what makes us human.